Today, we're going to dig into a book that really stirred the pot and sparked a huge global conversation. It's called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, written by political scientists John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. And their work really boils down to one central and, for many, pretty provocative question.
So right off the bat, the authors present us with a puzzle. They ask, why does the United States give Israel a level of financial and diplomatic support that, as they put it, is totally beyond compare in modern history? They decided to try and find an answer for what makes this relationship so unique.
And to give you a sense of the scale they're talking about, the book points straight to the numbers. Mearsheimer and Walt say that by 2005, direct U.S. aid to Israel had hit nearly $154 billion. But they argue this huge financial commitment is really just one piece of a much bigger puzzle of unwavering American support.
Okay, so here's our game plan for walking through their argument. We'll start by looking at this so-called special relationship and why the authors question the usual justifications for it. Then we'll dive into their own answer, what they call the lobby, how they say it works, the impact they claim it has on policy, and finally, what they think should be done about it.
All right, so where do the authors even begin? Well, they start by taking a hard look at and trying to dismantle the two main reasons you always hear for this deep U.S. support for Israel: the strategic argument and the moral argument.
First up, the strategic argument. The common claim that Israel is a vital partner for the U.S. in a tough neighborhood. But Mearsheimer and Walt, they really push back on that. They argue that, hey, maybe Israel was an asset during the Cold War, but since then it's actually become what they call a strategic liability. They believe the close relationship complicates America's goals in the Middle East and actually fuels anti-American feelings.
Okay, next they go after the moral argument, the idea that this support is all about shared democratic values. The author's counter is that this moral case is, and this is their word, dwindling. And the main reason they give for this is what they describe as Israel's treatment of Palestinians in the occupied territories.
So, if the authors are arguing that it's not about strategic interests or moral imperatives, then what is it about? Well, this brings us to the absolute core of their book, the influence of what they call the Israel lobby.
Now, the authors are really specific with their definition here, and it's important. They don't describe the lobby as some shadowy, unified group. Instead, they call it a loose coalition of different organizations and people. And they make a crucial point, stating very clearly that this is not a cabal or conspiracy, but just a powerful special interest group doing its thing in American politics.
So the next logical question is, how does this coalition supposedly use its influence? The book breaks it down into two main strategies.
The first strategy, according to the book, is all about working the system in Washington, D.C. The classic stuff. Directly lobbying members of Congress and officials, using campaign donations to help friends and make life difficult for critics, and trying to get people who are sympathetic to their views appointed to important government jobs.
The second strategy they describe moves beyond Washington and into the court of public opinion. They argue the lobby works to shape the public conversation by encouraging positive media coverage of Israel, building up a strong presence in influential think tanks. And this is a very controversial part of their argument by trying to shut down debate by accusing critics of anti-Semitism. Okay, so we've talked about the how, but what about the what? What's the actual real-world effect of this influence, according to the book? Mearsheimer and Walt spent a lot of time on case studies, and we're going to focus on the one they see as the most important, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
On this issue, the authors claim the lobby's influence has been decisive. They argue it has consistently backed Israeli policies aimed at preventing a sovereign Palestinian state. They also say that any time a U.S. president has tried to put pressure on Israel, the lobby has stepped in to bring them back into line, which, in their view, makes it almost impossible for the U.S. to be a fair mediator.
So, after laying out this whole critique, where do the authors land? What's their solution? Well, they finish by calling for a complete rethinking of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And this quote really sums up their core recommendation. They argue that the U.S. needs to end this special relationship and just treat Israel like a normal state. What does that mean? Well, it means supporting Israel when their interests line up with America's, but disagreeing with them when they don't, just like with any other country. And in their view, that would also mean eventually phasing out those massive aid packages.
And that brings us to the end. Look, the claims in this book set off an absolute firestorm of debate. A lot of people praised it and a lot of people condemned it. But no matter what you think of their conclusions, Mearsheimer and Walt's work really forces you to ask a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond this one case. What is the right role for any special interest group when it comes to shaping a country's foreign policy?